Hello, I'm Beth Joey and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, welcome. This is a channel where I paint my face, turn my camera on and talk about some books. I recently realized that in the 1.5 years roughly that I've been on and off receiving Fairyloot and Illumicrate subscription boxes, I have received 20 books and I have read 3 of them. Now, whilst I love spoiling myself with book purchases every single month, it's not the most efficient way to spend my money, so I thought I've got to find a way to really motivate myself to read these books, and the only way that I'm going to be able to do that is if I create a sort of game out of it for myself. So I came up with this game here, which is my book box battle. The aim of the game is to pit the Fairyloot and Illumicrate books against each other and see which book box comes out on top, and potentially find out if I am wasting my money on a particular book box if I find that there are a lot of books that I'm just not enjoying from that box. The way that I'm going to do this is I have written down every single book that I own but haven't read from one of these subscription boxes in these 2 cups, this being the Illumicrate cup and this being the Fairyloot cup. Every couple of weeks or however often I do this, I pick one book from each cup, pit them against each other against a number of different criteria, essentially using the core pile system plus 1 extra. The core pile system judges a book out of 5 based on 7 sort of characteristics or themes. The first is characters, then atmosphere, then writing style, then plot, then intrigue, then logic/relationships, and then enjoyment. And then the one that I have added to that is design, because obviously these special edition boxes, there is a design to a lot of these books that is really quite beautiful, and then there are some misses, so I have to judge it on that too. Without further ado, let's pick the first book from the Fairyloot cup. The first book that I'm going to be reading for this series is going to be whatever this is. We have got Witches Steeped in Gold by Shannon Smart, which is actually a book that has been on my TBR for a really long time, and I think it's actually on my self-destruct list because I just haven't gotten around to reading this and the motivation to read it hasn't really been there. And going straight into my second pick, we are going for Illumicrate now with the lovely pink sticky notes. We are picking whatever this is. This one is The Ivory Key by Akshaya Raman, and I think this is one that was actually a second book in that box. It wasn't the main book for this particular box. So yeah, again, it's been on my list for a long time. As for what they're about, the majority of these books, I don't know a lot about them, so I'm going to be reading you the blurb. So for the Fairyloot one, which is Witches Steeped in Gold by Shannon Smart, the blurb says, "Order divides them, revenge will unite them. Uriah Adair has spent her life in a cell, heir of an overthrown and magically gifted dynasty. She was exiled from the island nation of Aika, but every day brings her closer to freedom and vengeance. Jasmine Carriott grew up dressed in gold with stolen magic at her fingertips. Daughter of the self-crowned Doyen, her existence is a threat to her mother's rule, but Jasmine has no intention of dying. Sworn enemies, the 2 witches enter a deadly alliance to take down the woman who threatens both their worlds. But revenge is a bloody pursuit, and nothing is certain except the lengths Uriah and Jasmine will go to win this game." And then the second one is the Illumicrate pick, which is The Ivory Key by Akshaya Raman, and it says, "Vera is desperate to establish her legacy as a revered Maharani of Ashoka. But with the country's only quarry running out of magic, a precious resource that has kept Ashoka safe from conflict for centuries, she can no longer protect her citizens from the looming threat of war. Vera's only hope is to find a mysterious artifact of legend, the Ivory Key. But in order to retrieve it, she must reunite with her strange siblings, who have taken very different paths. Vera, Ronak, Caleb, and runaway Rhea each have something to gain from finding the Ivory Key, and even more to lose if they fail. But with each sibling harboring secrets, the very thing that brought them together could tear them apart. And their world for good." So as for what I'm going to be reading first, I'm going to pick up The Ivory Key by Akshaya Raman, and this is purely because I've got the audiobook for this one, and the only way I seem to be able to focus on reading at the moment is by listening to an audiobook while I read along. I don't know what it is, I'm just struggling to keep my mind on one thing. Welcome to my messy desk. I am here to tell you guys that I have just finished The Ivory Key by Akshaya Raman, and unfortunately I didn't love this book. Using the core pile system with the D for design added to the very end, this book did get 3.5 stars out of 5, but that was heavily skewed towards the fact that the design got 7 out of 10 from me. If we remove design from the sort of core pile rating, it literally just gets 2.8 stars. Like, it is not a good reading experience for me, unfortunately. Starting with the positives though, I do want to talk about the design of this book very quickly because I think it is an absolutely beautiful edition of this book. I love the sort of vibrant coloring on the front, the oranges, the browns. It's really vibrant, really beautiful, and I love that you see all 4 characters on the book. It really helps with sort of visualizing each of the characters as you're going through the story, seeing all the siblings, because you are following 4 different perspectives. So it does help to sort of isolate each person. You know what they look like. So obviously you've got this orange like sunset gradient style background with this like circle design in the middle here. And then also this blue, like electric blue metallic looking foiling, which is shiny and beautiful on the front and back cover as well, which is just, again, beautiful. We've got electric blue sprayed edges, and then as well, it's been signed with a little note from the author printed in the book. Overall, a really beautiful book. So I had to give it a high rating in terms of design, but unfortunately the rest of the book did let me down. Despite experiencing the story from all 4 characters' point of views, I don't feel like I got to know any particular one of them in any great detail because they all felt very surface level. Frankly, it all just felt very cliche, and each of the characteristics of each character was repeated constantly, and the issues they were facing were repeated constantly. So it was being drilled into you so often that you didn't connect with any of them because their descriptions began to get really annoying. I also got really frustrated by how much time was spent waffling at the beginning of the story, where the characters would just complain about their lives and how they needed to do something to fix it, and making this plan of what they were going to do to fix it, but then spending another 50 to 100 pages still discussing the plan and getting to the point where they would finally take the action and go on that scavenger hunt for the ivory key, especially because the blurb at the back did really sort of highlight the fact that the ivory key would be a major part of the plot, when in actual fact I only think the actual scavenger hunt and the actual adventure portion of the story came into play in the last 150 pages. I will admit that at the beginning of the book I did find myself very hooked by the descriptions and the settings and everything like that. They were really beautifully described, but then at a certain point it got too much where the descriptions would be repeated throughout despite having already been covered in an earlier section of the book, or sections that were completely irrelevant to the plot of the story would be described in great detail and then would never be mentioned again, and you just don't understand why you spent half a page describing a wall that isn't relevant. There were lots and lots of references as well to items of clothing and foods and things where I think the author just assumed that we would know what they were. They were obviously native to Ashoka, but I am just not familiar with those foods and those clothings, those outfits, nothing like that. So I spent a lot of time Googling what half the words meant, which obviously takes you out of the story, because at the end of the day it's hard to imagine a feast when you don't know what the food looks like. As I mentioned before, there was way too much time at the beginning of the book spent in the pandering, the debating, the complaining, the waffling, just all the setup stuff before the actual adventure scavenger hunt sort of style of things, of events happened when they were trying to find the ivory key, which meant that I don't think the pacing was very good because it was just so much internal issues and family conflicts that could have been covered way faster than they were. The magic system did bend back on itself towards the end of this book, and I think that's going to be explained in the sequel. I don't think that's a plot hole or an issue so much as just a development within the plot, within the story. So it makes sense how that bent back on itself. But I think in terms of motivations of each of the characters, they would constantly talk about how pressing everything was, but then spend so much time talking and debating. And I've said this before, but it just didn't make sense to me. The tension and the high stakes nature of the situation did not match the actual pace in which the characters were going through each event, and it was just way too much time spent plotting and prepping, and I spent a lot of the book just wishing for the end. So unfortunately, I really didn't enjoy this book, and this is not a great start to this whole book box battle thing. But we are moving on from that, and we are jumping straight into Witches Steeped in Gold by Shannon Smart. This is the Fairyloot sort of side of this book box battle. So Illumicrate's currently sitting on 3.5 stars. Now it's Fairyloot's time to hopefully take the cake with a little bit of a chunky, hardback, beautiful edition of Witches Steeped in Gold. Hey guys, I am back and I have just finished reading Witches Steeped in Gold by Shannon Smart. But before I tell you about my rating for this particular book, I have to fess up to something rather blonde that I did when I rated this book, which is basically when I figure out my star rating, I rate everything on CallPile out of 10. So each of the sort of slots or the letters out of 10, and then I figure out my average star rating based on that, but then I have to change it to out of 5 because that's how it comes up on Goodreads and everything like that. But when I told you what my average star rating was, I told told you what my average star rating out of 10 was, which isn't my actual average star rating. So the actual sort of rating for this book is 2 stars. It is a low 2 stars. It is just 2 stars, aka like 1.9 something, but 2 stars for this book. But now that we've got that moment of stupidity out of the way, I can tell you about my thoughts on this book, which is Steeped in Gold, which I also gave 2 stars. But this one was a higher 2 stars, I think, slightly. As I think I did with the previous one, I'm first off going to talk about the design of this book. So you've got this beautiful sort of shimmery foiled hardback paper jacket, whatever that's called, and then it sort of goes around onto the back as well. It's this beautiful like tribal looking print. Absolutely love how shimmery and gold and silver it is. We've also got the reversible dust jacket with the sort of 2 main characters on the front there. Beautiful, beautiful drawing. Similar pattern on the hardcover to the main front cover with just that gold sort of foil on the hardcover and then on the spine. Then we've got this beautiful sprayed edge as well, which I love. And then the sign page is like another beautiful sort of artistic drawing, and I do really, really love this edition of which is Steeped in Gold. I love it more than the sort of traditionally printed edition. So I'm really, really glad that I did get this from Fairyloot, but I don't know why, I just didn't love it as much as I love the Ivory Key. Something about the sort of shiny on the paperback rather than on the hardback, and then just the colors being so vibrant on this one, whereas they're a bit more muted on here, I think. So this one did get a lower score in terms of the design section of my core pile rating. Someone's just started playing music downstairs, but we're gonna talk over it and pretend it's not happening. So in terms of characters, I definitely didn't connect as much with any of the characters in this book as I wanted to. I felt them very, very hard to breach, and they were very brutal. I've discovered I don't really like villainous main characters, and these guys were definitely that. I also don't think that the secondary characters were distinguishable from each other. I got them mixed up a lot of the time, but I will say they did add value in terms of how they sort of contributed to the overall plotline. Their stories were interesting within themselves. They had their own storyline, their own backstories, rather than just being sort of figureheads plotted in there for the sort of romantic subplot that's definitely happening in this story. As for atmosphere, listening to the audiobook while reading at the same time really, really helped with the immersiveness of this story, because the voice actors, I presume, were of the ethnicity of the characters in this book, or sort of similar ethnicity. So they had the accents and they had the tone and the slang, I think, that the characters in this book were intended to have, which made it feel a bit more authentic. So in terms of immersiveness, it was perfect in that regard. But in terms of the setting, I did really, really struggle to picture a lot of the scenes and a lot of the characters, because there was language used, language that isn't English, and then wasn't explained in terms of what those particular words meant. So it was hard to sort of place what the author was trying to tell me or trying to envision, because I didn't understand the language. And I did look up some of the words, which obviously draws you out of the reading experience. And so in terms of atmosphere, it did receive a lesser score, I think, than the Ivory Key. In terms of writing, it was definitely very, very descriptive, and there was a lot of time spent on the setting and the motivations of the characters, which I think was really helpful. But I did find that the characters spoke very abruptly, and I'm not sure if it's a cultural thing or something that I'm not familiar with in terms of writing style, but I just found the characters very, very abrupt, and maybe that's why I wasn't able to connect with them as well, because there was just it didn't feel like it flowed as much as I wanted it to. For the plot, I find it really difficult to comment on things like pacing and plot, because I genuinely don't know what the overall point of this story was. I feel like things kept swapping and changing around. I didn't know what the end goal was. I knew the characters' motivations, but I didn't know what they were striving for. For intrigue, I was definitely more hooked on this book than some of my more recent reads like the Ivory Key, though there were quite a few times where I did wish I could put it down and pick up something else that I was perhaps more interested in. I don't think I will be reading the sequel for this book, just because it didn't hook me in as much, because I was confused a lot of the time, and that does definitely hamper the intrigue a bit. I think I rated the logic side the highest, because the characters were definitely very clear in terms of their motivations. They really did develop a lot throughout the story, but their motivations stayed the same, but the means to how they got to those goals definitely changed and developed, and the brutality, I think, of some of the characters changed and developed throughout the story, which I thought was really interesting to really see this big character arc. I do think the plot was very, very complex, and I think at times there was a lot of unnecessary information scattered throughout the story that didn't seem to contribute later on. I know I read an interview with the author saying she dropped a lot of like Easter eggs throughout the story for later plot points, but I didn't find a lot of those, and I just think that that impacted my overall enjoyment. But overall, it was an incredibly unique story, which I really, really appreciated. I don't think I've ever read anything like this before, so I have to give it credit for that. And I really did love the authenticity that came with those audiobook narrators. It really, really pushes you into that story because you are imagining the way these characters speak in the way I'm sure they were intended to by the author. So it was a really good book, but unfortunately it only got the 2 stars for me because it was let down by some of the bits that I just didn't understand. For the final book box battle between these 2 books, I'm going to run you through all the ratings and we will find out who is the winner. So for characters, The Ivory Key got 3 out of 10 and Witches Steeped in Gold also got 3 out of 10. For atmosphere, both books got 4 out of 10. For writing style, Witches Steeped in Gold came out on top with 3 out of 10. The Ivory Key got 2 out of 10. For plot, Witches Steeped in Gold came out again with 3 out of 10 and The Ivory Key got 2 out of 10. For intrigue, again, Witches Steeped in Gold came out on top with 4 out of 10. The Ivory Key got 2 out of 10. Logic, Witches Steeped in Gold, winner again, 6 out of 10. The Ivory Key got 5 out of 10. Enjoyment, again, Witches Steeped in Gold got 3 out of 10. The Ivory Key got 2 out of 10. But in that final element of design, The Ivory Key came out on top with 7 out of 10 and Witches Steeped in Gold got 5 out of 10. But the overall ratings for these books were both 2 out of 5 stars. So we have a tie. We are starting with a tie. So yeah, I guess we're going to jump straight into the next books, and you are just going to have to watch the next version of this video to find out what those are going to be. Let me know what you thought of this video down below, what you thought of this competition. Let me know if you're interested in seeing more of this sort of thing where I get 2 book subscription boxes and I battle them out head to head, see who comes out on top. Obviously this one in terms of ratings wasn't quite the juxtaposition that I wanted to see, with like one doing really, really well, one doing not so well. They were both at 2 stars, but hopefully in future we'll get a bit more differentiation between the ratings. As always, let me know what you're reading at the moment, if you're enjoying it, if you're not. I love to chat to you guys in the comments down below, and I do my best to reply to every single comment. I really, really hope that you did like this video, and if you did, please do let me know by liking, subscribing, and hitting that notification bell all down below. It is a super, super easy way to help my channel grow, and I will see you lovely people in my next video. Bye!